Hello, welcome to the second extra lecture for Problems of Philosophy. Today we're going to talk about Pascal's Wager, and this will wrap up our section about philosophical considerations of God. We talked about, remember in the previous weeks, arguments for and against the existence of God, both using reason and empirical evidence. So that was the ontological argument, the cosmological argument, and the complexity argument. Then we looked at Richard Swinburne's defense of why evil can exist in the world even with an all-good God. Pascal's Wager is a different kind of argument. First, we'll look at two contemporary authors talking about Pascal's Wager, and then we'll take a look at an excerpt from Pascal's text itself. So this argument is neutral to God's existence. It says that maybe we'll never have reasons either for or against the existence of God. There's nothing that's possible. An absence of evidence means that you can never disprove God's existence. But short of God actually revealing himself to all of us, there doesn't seem to be any kind of definitive evidence, either rational or empirical, to prove God's existence. So we are stuck in a zone where we can't have evidence either way. And that is referred to, I think, in Blackburn, but also elsewhere, as metaphysical ignorance. Remember that metaphysics is just the study of what is or is not, the study of being, existence itself. So if we're in a state of metaphysical ignorance, we have no information at all. So then we also know that there have been a lot of really smart people, a lot of very good people who have used their faith as the central part of their value systems and who they are. So how do we decide? What should you do if you're a person that's in this metaphysical ignorance and you're conflicted? You don't know what to believe. Pascal was in this state when he came up with the wager, which is what we'll define now. He asked, what are the benefits and detriments for belief versus disbelief? This is a kind of rudimentary game theory, which can be used as a decision-making tool. You have a little chart here like this, and you figure out with whatever options are available to you and what the consequences are for each of them. So the top row, you can either, or there can be a state in the world where God does exist, or a state in the world where God does not exist. We don't know. The first column, your choices that are open to you are to believe in God or to not believe. This encompasses all of the possibilities and options. Then if you believe and God ends up existing, you are rewarded with infinite bliss, infinite utility, infinite happiness. It doesn't really matter so much what the content of it ends up being, except we know that it's infinite and it's positive. In a Christian conception, this is something like heaven. The next possibility is that you believe that God exists, but the state of the world is actually that God does not exist. When Blackburn reformulates this chart on page 270, he puts a 0. Other authors have argued for these numbers. So if you believe in God doesn't exist, nothing really happens on Blackburn's estimation. Other people have said, okay, well, I have to give certain things up for my faith. I have to go and worship every Sunday, maybe. And that could be the -10. It doesn't really matter what the numbers are. Or there might be something that you really wanted to do, but your religious doctrine prevented it. It could even be so bad as 10 or 100,000 or 1,000,000. The reason it doesn't matter is because it's functionally nothing. It's functionally zero when compared with infinity. Almost any finite number is just, there's no comparison to eternal infinity. The next option is if you don't believe and God does end up existing. It's the opposite. You're punished with negative infinite torment or suffering, the Christian conception of hell. And again, this does not compare with whatever benefits you would get from not believing if God doesn't exist. You might be able to have a lot more free time. You might be able to choose to behave differently because there's no specific restrictions against what you want to do. I mean, you might have some other kind of morality, but you don't have to follow the tenets of the religion. So Pascal said, if you look at this chart, it's an obvious conclusion. You must choose to believe that God exists because positive, infinite happiness or pleasure or bliss destroys all of the other rewards and detriments. Blackburn then goes on to give some counter-arguments against this conclusion. First, this only works with a Christian version of God. People believe in a lot of other things, other religions. So there could be a Hindu God or a Muslim God or a Jewish God or a Sikh God, to things totally apart from religions, cults and fairies and ghosts. So cults and fairies and ghosts might not be able to reward you with infinite happiness, but you can use a chart on anything that you want to decide on whether to believe or disbelieve. He does concede, however, that you might just be interested in religious belief. Still, the fact that there are competing versions of religious belief becomes part of a counter-argument. Next, Blackburn argues that life on Earth should be treated with more consideration. The suffering and the pleasure and pains that we experience here are not nothing. Even if you have a religious worldview and afterlife is infinite, there would be no reason for there to be a finite existence if it didn't matter somehow. So writing off all positives and negatives about the life we have now doesn't count as evidence in favor of the wager for Blackburn. And the final counter argument that Blackburn talks about is one that many people think is a knockout blow for Pascal's wager. And that's if we really and truly start from a position of metaphysical ignorance, which means, of course, we don't have any information on whether God exists or not. God could be anything. It could be the exact opposite of how we think God is now. Maybe if you believe in God, He sends you to hell. And this is a more pleasant way to try and argue why even a good God might do that. This is a quote from Blackburn on page 271. What if there is a very powerful, very benevolent deity? He, she, it, or they has determined as follows. The good human beings are those who follow the natural light of reason, which is given to them to control their beliefs. These good humans follow the arguments and hence avoid religious convictions. So these ones with the strength of mind to not believe in such things are the ones that go to heaven. The rest go to hell. So the idea is here, and this is also shared by a lot of people with religious convictions. The natural light of reason is a gift. If God exists, He gave it to us to organize our beliefs and our world and our actions here on earth. And if we don't follow it, we're going against that gift. And Blackburn is saying that reason tells us we have to remain agnostic. There are no reasons for or against. So maybe if you defy reason and have religious convictions, this kind of God that we just imagined will punish you. So that's the opposite of our normal conception of God. If we start from this position of metaphysical ignorance, we also can't decide between this imagined deity, reason-backed deity, and the common conception of a Christian God. We can't pick one or the other. And this one would have an opposite chart from the one we saw back here. If you believe and God does exist, then you'll get the negative infinity. But if you don't believe and God does exist, that's when you get the positive infinity. And we can't decide. We have no information because even Pascal admitted that we are metaphysically ignorant of what God is. The next author, Linda Zagzebski, we have also read this semester, and she takes some of Blackburn's counterarguments plus a few additional counterarguments and gives reasons for and against them. So some mitigating factors where you might still want to take Pascal's wager. If Blackburn was staunchly anti-Pascal's wager, Zagzebski is a little bit more neutral. So first she considers the objection about the variety of kinds of gods there might be. Christian, Muslim, Hindu, not to mention the kinds of gods we haven't even imagined, like the scenario from the previous slide. Zagzebski says the options need to be live options. So if this argument functions in the role it was intended to, which is someone who's really struggling, this is an individual person who's really struggling on whether or not to believe and have religious faith, then this counterargument matters a lot less. One, because there was no multiculturalism when Pascal was writing. There weren't mosques and temples and churches all intermingled in the same communities. But even though there is now, and we're aware that there are other conceptions of God, when we're struggling, what matters to them isn't choosing between these different conceptions of God. It's choosing between religious faith or not. So in that context and in that situation, your only live options are to decide whether you should believe and have religious convictions or whether you should not. The second objection that Zagzebski takes on is the low view of faith objection. So a lot of theists find betting on outcomes repugnant or repulsive. Right now we are going to take a break, and I will see you in part 2.